A little bit of background on Cambridge University. So Cambridge University was founded in 1209. It's one of the oldest universities in the world. It's world renowned. Um, Everybody knows it as one of the best universities in the world. It's sort of always in the top league tables across the world. And we have great students who come to us from the UK and also from around the world. We're quite an international university. We offer 30 courses here. There's a great range of options across all degrees, a lot of flexibility, which hopefully you'll see in a minute. I'll talk to you a bit about the Cambridge English course in particular. On average, we have about 3,500 students made an offer to study here each year. One of the things that makes Cambridge different to a lot of other universities in the UK, it's a collegiate university, as is Oxford. So Cambridge and Oxford are both collegiate in this way. That means we're made up of roughly sort of 30 individual colleges. And your college is effectively your home away from home. It's where you live. It's a lot of your social activities take place in college, although not all. I will emphasize that a lot of people do take part in social activities across the university and make friends across the university, not just within their college. It's where you also have some of your teaching. So within college, you have supervisions, which is small group teaching. It's the same as in Oxford, but in Oxford they call them tutorials, but they're the same thing. So the college, you have a director of studies who then organises this small group teaching. You are, as well as being part of the college, part of the university and part of the departmental faculty. And it's the departmental faculty that organise your lectures. So you have some of your teaching with others from other colleges as well. And the course is set by the department of faculty, as are the exams. But then the college sort of teaches you on a more one-to-one basis. Supervisions are typically 1 or 2 students with a subject specialist, which is really the thing that makes us very unique at Cambridge, is we have that really, really one-to-one or 2 students to 1 supervisor teaching. Colleges also provide a really great amount of support. So you get this academic support through the supervision system that I've explained. There's great welfare support as well. So within college, you're all assigned a tutor who is separate from your academic teachers, normally does a different subject to you. So there's kind of a lot of separation there. And a tutor is a great person that you can go to talk about basically anything that you just want to chat about, academic or non-academic. They also can normally help you access funds if you need any sort of financial support. There are a lot of hardship funds available through colleges. That's one of the great things about Cambridge, is because we have this collegiate feel, there's that opportunity to really get to know your academic teachers and your tutors, and for them to really support you more individually. So in terms of choosing a college, because a lot of people always ask us, how do I choose a college? There are so many to choose from. Some things you might want to think about is, do you want an old college or a new college? Do you want a large college or a small college? Do you want to be in the centre of historic Cambridge or a little bit further out? The advantages of being a little bit further out, I suppose, is you're a bit further away from tourists. Cambridge can be quite touristy in certain months, but then in central Cambridge, you're in the centre of a beautiful historic city. So I think there are pros and cons to all these considerations, and it really depends on personal preference. Ultimately, though, I will emphasise that the course is the same regardless of which college you go to. The standard of education is the same regardless of which college you go to. And everybody loves their college regardless of where they go. So in some senses, it's not that important a decision which college you choose. But I will, of course, say a bit about Corpus Christi College, which is, we are Corpus Christi College. We're the ones running these masterclasses, and we obviously think you should apply to us. So I'll tell you a bit about why. We were founded in 1352. We are one of the oldest colleges in Cambridge. We're also one of the smallest colleges in Cambridge. So when people choose Corpus, it's often because they want an old and small college. That's us. We admit sort of 94-ish students per year, which is a much smaller cohort. That's across all subjects, but per year group. So much smaller than quite a lot of other colleges. We are also a very central college. We're right in the centre of the city. You can get to so many places within just a few minutes. Walk of Corpus, you can get to supermarket, you can get to quite a lot of the lecture halls, only a few minutes walk away. The English faculty is probably about a 10-minute walk away, because the English faculty is not actually in the centre of Cambridge, but it's very close to the centre of Cambridge. As the students mentioned earlier today, everything in Cambridge is pretty close together. So when we say it's a little bit further away, it's really not that far away at all. We are a really close-knit, friendly undergraduate community. That I think the students emphasised this morning. It's really true to say that our students all know each other really well across different year groups as well. When I look out my office window, I'm always seeing students across different year groups spending time together. And that comes, I think, from being quite a small college. Those friendships are able to form quite easily. A bit about English at Corpus in particular. So you met Brendan this morning, but in addition to Brendan, we have some other fellows, or the teachers in English. So Sarah Kane, you can see on the screen here a bit about their interests. I won't read it all out, but Sarah Kane, Drew Milne, Caroline Bassett and Samuel Lassman are a few of our other teachers, in addition to Brendan, who you met. So you'll be able to see there's a wide range of interests that our English fellows have. That's not to say that those are the only things you would learn. It's not all based on their interests. So you might be supervised by some of these teachers in their particular interest areas, but they might be your directors of studies who would then find you supervisors in other areas. So all students do all the different areas of English, all the set course. But then the teachers and the fellows at Corpus Christi would help you find the right supervisors. So you're always supervised by a subject specialist in that particular area. And that's one of the great things about studying at Cambridge. To move on now to the application process. I won't spend too long on this. Some of you will probably have heard a bit about the application process from school already by now, but this is just a quick overview. So first of all, you choose your course. This is part of one of the ways you might think about choosing your course, thinking about, is English at Cambridge for me? Do I like the sound of practical criticism that we learned about this morning? Do I like the sort of course content that I'm going to go through in a second? Then you choose your college, or you could also make an open application. So an open application is where you don't select a specific college. You say, I select open application, and then there's a central algorithm that assigns you to a college. You're then informed which college your application has been assigned to, and from that point onwards, you are an applicant to that college, and you'll be given a first point of contact, and me effectively, an admissions coordinator at whichever college you're assigned, who then will guide you through the admissions process from there. You then check the admissions assessment arrangements. I'll talk about that in a second. And then you apply on UCAS. So once you've checked those things, you know you're happy with all the requirements, and you meet the requirements, you apply on UCAS. The deadline this year is the 16th of October, and it is a hard deadline. If you miss that deadline, unfortunately, no matter how good your application is, we can't consider your application. So it's really, really important that you make sure your UCAS application is in on time. You then submit something called My Cambridge Application, which is a supplementary additional little questionnaire that all Cambridge applicants have to submit. Again, that is a compulsory part of Cambridge application to complete this form. As part of that, there is an additional personal statement. That aspect is optional, and you don't have to complete the extra personal statement. What sometimes students find quite useful to do in that personal statement is pick out, in particular, maybe aspects of the Cambridge course they're particularly excited about, something that's a bit more specific to Cambridge than you might put in your UCAS personal statement, which of course goes to all 5 of your university choices. You then submit written work. For English, you're required to submit, this would be the case in most colleges, it could vary a bit college to college, but I think certainly at Corpus, you'd be required to submit 2 pieces of written work, or 2 essays, basically from your ordinary school work. And then we shortlist and invite students to come to interview, which is in early December. And then in late January, you receive your decision. And that decision could be that you've been offered a place at the college you applied to. It could be that sadly Cambridge aren't able to offer you a place, or it could be that you have been what's called pooled, and you've been pulled to another college, and another college that's not the one you applied to is now actually offering you a place. That is something that can happen, and the pooling system is our way of effectively moderating across all the colleges, so it's fair. It's not harder to get into one college than another in that way. It's not sort of doesn't make it unfair if one college has a surge in applications randomly one year. The pool kind of evens all of that out to make sure that the best applicants right across the university get the places. So I'll just dig into some of those a little bit more. So when thinking about choosing your course, which is kind of the first thing you want to think about when you're applying for Cambridge, think about the structure of the course. And different English courses in different universities will look quite different. Cambridge, one of the kind of key things about the Cambridge course is practical criticism, as Brendan talked about this morning. So in first year, it's compulsory to do practical criticism, and you also do practical criticism in your third year. Now, it's practical criticism, as Brendan said, is a really, really great paper, but thinking about whether you want to study that or not could impact your decision on whether or not you want to apply to Cambridge. Also in first year, you do a Shakespeare paper, which is actually a portfolio of essays rather than an exam. And you start work on 2 of the period papers, and I've listed the period papers on the slide. I won't read all of them out, but as you can see, there's this like broad sweep of literature across the ages. It covers all the different periods. In second year, everybody does the 1300 to 1500 paper and 2 other period papers. So of the period papers, you're not ultimately examined in all of them. You get a choice on, you would have to be examined in 3 out of the 4 period papers, I believe, which is why we were mentioning earlier, it's not compulsory here to do the 1066 to 1350 period paper, whereas I believe in Oxford it is compulsory to start with that paper. So there's a little bit of choice in which periods you end up studying, but being examined in, but effectively everybody does study a nice broad sweep of literature through the ages. And also worth saying that in your first and second year, which is what we call part 1A and part 1B, one paper can be replaced by a dissertation. So one of the period papers, that is, can be replaced by a dissertation. So you can't replace practical criticism or Shakespeare, but one of the period papers, you could do a dissertation instead on a topic of your choice. So that gives a little bit of free choice there as well. Then in third year, that's where you really get quite a lot of choice in third year. You have to do practical criticism. You have to do the tragedy paper. And I will say, having been an English student here myself 10 years ago, when I was an English student here, the tragedy paper, I wasn't expecting it to be, but it was my absolute favourite part of the course in Cambridge. It's just an amazing paper. You study tragedy right through from Greek tragedy to present day. And it's just kind of felt like this kind of culmination of studying English at Cambridge. You then also do 2 optional papers, and there are so many options to choose from here. So just to kind of say a few options that are available at the moment, although they do change a bit year to year. You could do Chaucer, you can do prose forms, you could do American literature, post-colonial and related literatures is a current paper, visual culture, contemporary writing in English, early modern drama, or you can do so other ones, the lyric paper. So a lot of variety there, and you can choose 2 of those. So really start thinking about the areas you want to focus on. And you also write a dissertation on anything that you're interested in English literature or literature written in English. And you can also sometimes borrow papers from other departments, such as the ASNAC department, the classics department, or the MML department. And I believe you can also swap in one of the papers and just do 1 optional paper and 2 dissertations instead. Which would then mean that you have fewer exams at the end. So there's a bit of flexibility there. So although it looks like there are kind of these lots of set papers, there is actually a lot of flexibility within the course because there are very few actual set texts. So within each paper, you might be set essay questions, but you can basically choose which texts you use to respond to those essays within that period of literature. So a lot of free choice within each set paper. I've put a link at the bottom there where you can find out more about the papers that are currently on offer. if you're interested. Another aspect I just want to briefly mention is checking the admissions assessment arrangements. So I'll tell you a bit about that now. English at Cambridge has what's called a college registered assessment. That means that you don't have to remember to register for it when you apply, which for some other courses you have to do that. If you are invited for an interview, the college will register you for this assessment and invite you to take this assessment. And it's normally just in the sort of the week or so before interviews. That's how we've done it for the last few years, but we communicate dates to you really, really clearly in advance. We do use the admissions assessment in part to help us decide who to offer a place to, but it's not weighted any more heavily than any other aspect of the admissions process. So we look at every single piece of information together to make an overall judgment on each applicant. Now, the format of the Cambridge English Admissions Assessment is one essay question in response to unseen texts. So in some senses, thinking about the sort of practical criticism approach, although it doesn't have to be a specific approach to these texts, but that's dealing with unseen material. That can be a good way to start thinking about getting used to handling unseen material and responding to unseen material. The best way to prepare is just to read lots, I would say. I mean, that's always the best way to prepare as an English student, and think about what you read. It's not dissimilar to the ELAT, which you might have come across, which is a paper that I believe Oxford use currently. And there are lots and lots of ELAT past papers online. It's quite similar in format. It's the same sort of idea of here are some unseen texts, choose to and respond to those. I think this phrasing is normally in any way that seems interesting to you. So quite similar to the ELAT. So lots of past papers that you can use to practice responding to unseen texts there. And there is also a sample paper available online. I've put the link on the slide that you can see. So do familiarize yourself with the format of that, we'd recommend. I'll briefly mention the interview, although this is a long way off, so I'm not going to spend long on it. The interview is designed to basically challenge you and stretch you. It should feel like you're being taught and pushed in your interview. It's designed to be a bit like a mini supervision. So see how you get on in that supervision style teaching and who is going to respond to that style of teaching very well. Quite often you're given a piece of unseen material to talk about in one of the interviews. One of the other interviews might talk about things in your personal statement. They might talk about your written work that you've submitted. They might talk about specific things that you are interested in your A-level studies and then push you a bit beyond. But you should, as I say, expect to be pushed and challenged. There are lots of resources available online that the university, sorry, I can see there's a typo there. It says university. It's university, obviously. The university's produced sort of sample interviews online, so I would encourage you to go and have a look at those. But I recommend looking at the university resources. Anything that's put out by departments and colleges as well are good resources, rather than necessarily looking at YouTube videos on current students' experiences of interviews. That's not necessarily going to be quite so reliable in terms of the interview content. So I just recommend sticking on those university, college, and department resources. Thinking about what Cambridge looks for. So it is a competitive application process. I will emphasize that. Just to give you some figures, last year we had over 20,000 applicants. This is across all subjects, not just English, but over 20,000 applicants for around 3,500 offers. So it then therefore does mean that there are lots and lots of good applicants who unfortunately we can't offer a place to just because it's such a competitive process. So if you go through the process and you aren't offered a place, that's not to say that you're not a good English student. And that's important to remember. It means that on the day there was somebody who felt like a better fit for the course potentially than you, but doesn't mean that you're not going to go far as an English student just because it is so competitive. The admissions process is designed to help us find students generally who have enthusiasm, motivation, and potential in their subject. That's what we're really, really looking for. And as I've said, we look at a whole host of information, so all the aspects, your personal statement, your teacher reference, your GCSE grades, your A-level predicted grades, your written work, your assessment, We look at all of that and your interview performance as well to ultimately make decisions. We do contextualize applications. That means that we look at how you've done, for example, in your GCSEs within the context of your the school that you were at when you were doing GCSEs. So if you've performed really, really well for your school and you've got straight 8s, and generally in your school, nobody really gets 8s, that looks fantastic. If you've got straight 8s in your school and generally everybody in your school gets mostly 9s, that doesn't look as strong. So that's an example of one of the ways that we might contextualize applications, because we do have information on which schools students apply to, and it's a way to make it fair so that we're aiming to select the very best students regardless of the school that they attend. Supercurricular is the best way to make a competitive application. So you might have heard of extracurricular. Extracurricular is things like dance, music, things that are, interesting to you outside of the curriculum. We instead prefer to look for something called supercurricular, which is things that are interesting to do with the curriculum, but above the curriculum. So that's what curricular means there. So it's relevant to English, pushing you further than English, things that you are studying independently and without the kind of the guidance of syllabus or your teachers. And really engaging in supercurricular study is one way that you can show enthusiasm and motivation and also improve yourself as an English student. It is ultimately the backbone of any application to any competitive university, I'd say, not just Oxbridge. So even if you decide to not apply to Cambridge, but can apply to other great universities for English, this is still something that's highly recommended. As I said, it overall makes students a stronger applicant, and it's going to have a positive effect on your academic performance at school because you're bettering yourself as an English literature student by engaging in supercurricular. So how to actually go about supercurricular. These are some pointers. There's no real right or wrong way to do supercurricular, to be honest. Ultimately, the best advice is to go and find things that you're interested in and pursue that. But these are some tips. So have a plan of what you want to explore and what supercurricular resources you'll use, but this should be quite flexible. So if you start thinking, I'm going to use a particular resource, or I'm going to read a particular book, because it's English, it's all going to be reading books in reality. So I'm going to read a particular book, I'm going to explore a particular area of literature, and then you discover, you know what, I'm actually not enjoying that much. I'm not finding that interesting. There's no point in going down that particular area. Far better to actually pause, be flexible, find a different area of English that you think you might be interested in and go and pursue that. The best thing to do, as I said, is to go down the areas you're interested in. You're not going to study the entirety of English literature or even every single literature period or every single genre or anything like that in preparation for your application. That's kind of not possible. Instead, go deeply into the particular areas that you are interested in. Recommend keeping a supercurricular workbook. By this literally just means like a notebook, or if you prefer doing things on the computer, like a file that you save on your computer, where you just make notes on thoughts about the things that you're doing and reading, the lectures that you're going to, the books that you've been reading, the book that you followed up on after having read that. It's just a really good way to collect your thoughts. I actually personally, I process things much better when I write them down. So I might read something, but then in writing it down, I can kind of solidify a bit more what I think about that in a literary sense. So, and that's a good way to do that as well. And it's also, you might want, well, you are likely going to be talking about some of this stuff in your personal statement and then maybe even ultimately at interview. So having recorded some of this is a good way to then go back to your thoughts and remember what you were thinking when you were engaging with particular resources at that time. We do recommend keeping supercurricular engagement regular. So it says here every day. It could equally be, it could be half an hour after school each day. It could also be maybe a couple of hours at the weekend. It depends a little bit on your schedule, but regularity is important there. And don't just always postpone it, because I think getting into this kind of like good structured routine of engaging with material outside school is a really good habit to build in early, and ultimately will help you when you go on and study English literature at university, wherever you go, because English literature is quite an independent subject by nature of it. You have to do quite a lot of independent reading, and getting into that discipline of independent reading now will help you at that point. Read think, vocalize. That's kind of how you engage with it there. So read lots, think about it, and then by vocalize, go and find people to talk to about it. So write it down is good, but even better if you can, it could be you form a discussion group at school if you've got other students at your school who are also thinking of applying for English. It could just be that you chat to your friend over lunch about it. It's a good way of forming those thoughts and solidifying them in your head. Going to give you a few examples of English supercurricular resources, but I would really emphasize that these are just a few examples, and we really, really encourage you to go and find your own resources and follow the areas that you're interested in. So first of all, congratulations, you're in an English supercurricular activity right now. So masterclasses and academic lectures are certainly considered as supercurricular. They're a great starting point. So for example, if you found what Brendan was talking about this morning about practical criticism really, really interesting, or he gave you a book recommendation in that lecture this morning, you could then go and read that book and follow up on that. So think of the lecture as the starting point and then go and follow that on your own and kind of dig deeper and deeper and see where you get with it, basically. You could find a lecture online about another area of literature, and again, there might be some reading recommendations in that, and you follow that through to shape your reading a little bit further. Essay competitions are great, not because of whether you win an essay competition or are commended in an essay competition, but actually just the process of going through reading for, researching and writing the essay is a really good skill in and of itself, and gives you loads of great stuff to reflect on in your personal statement. So I've listed a couple of examples there, but you can find others yourself as well. So Trinity College, Cambridge have the Gold Prize for Essays in English Literature, and that's a deadline in August. Newnham College, Cambridge have the Wolf Essay Prize, and there's normally at least a couple that are particularly literature focused. They're not always all literature focused. So find essays that you're interested in, that push you beyond your curriculum, that you can then go and do lots of reading for, and it's a good way to structure your reading. Online resources, so I've just listed a couple there. The English faculty have a virtual classroom. If you've not discovered the HE Plus website yet, that's a great resource. They have like little mini YouTube clips and lectures, or suggested reading resources on specific topics within English. Again, a good starting point for supercurricular that you can then go further with on your own. And as I've said, I'm going to say it again because it's so important for English students, read. Just read lots and lots and lots. That is the best way to prepare for an English literature degree. And as I've said, read the literature that you find interesting and think about it. I'm just going to give you a little visual of how you might go about supercurricular in English. So these are just examples. They may be exactly what you're interested in, or that may be completely the wrong area of literature for you. But so first of all, sit down and write down what have you already done, sort of in terms of supercurricular for preparing for your English application. So you might note down that you've been to an online lecture on interwar literature, you've read T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland on your own, you've been to or watched online the Royal Shakespeare Company production of Macbeth, and you've read Hamlet independently. Now you might think, okay, that actually kind of splits into two groupings, effectively, areas of interest. Now, within that, what was I particularly interested in? I was really interested in the influence of cinema in interwar literature. That was something mentioned in the lecture that I was really, really interested in. And I was really interested in the role of supernatural in Jacobean literature. That might be two kind of little areas of focus that you think you might want to focus on more going forward. And then from there, you set about reading more, finding out more, thinking more about those particular areas. And I've just put some examples on the slide there. I won't read all of them out, but just that's a sort of how you might go about it. So what have you already engaged in? What are the themes that come out of that you're really interested in? And how are you going to go about pushing further into that and finding out more and structuring your reading going forward? That comes to the end of what I want to say to you all today about preparing a competitive application, because I want to leave 15 minutes for questions now. But I'll just put here the dates for our open days. So we have open days the 6th and 7th of July, and Oxford have open days the 28th and 29th of June. So we do encourage you to go and have a look around the universities and see what you think. I'm going to stop my screen share now, and I believe James is going to ask us some questions, and we've also got Brendan, who's kindly come back and can answer more of the sort of the specific course related questions. I think we pose those to Brendan rather than me.
Great. Well, we can go. Thanks, Naomi, for that. And we can go. I should say, I'm James. I'm the outreach coordinator here at Corpus Christi. So you might well find yourself meeting me one day if you come visit Corpus, or if you attend something else like this. Sort of my job to run things like, or interesting things like that. So the first question I'll direct to Brendan, if that's okay. So a student asks, if you have an interest in pre-1066 literature, are you able to take course papers from, say, the MML department or from the ASNAC department?
Short answer, yes. So it depends, I suppose, on which sort of pre-1066 tradition you're interested in. A lot are available, but people do take papers in a variety of what we call language options. So French, Spanish, German, classic, but I think they've recently added Japanese, Old English, so sometimes referred to as Anglo-Saxon English, always popular, Latin and Greek, people sometimes do as well. So yes.
Great. Naomi, you mentioned about female-only colleges. Could you just explain a little bit more about how that actually works within the university, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are two colleges, Murray Edwards College and Newnham College, who only admit women. In practice, that means that the college, the people you're living with are all girls, and the supervisions then within those colleges, at least in the first couple of years before you really specialise, would be all girls. I actually, just for interest, attended one of those colleges myself when I was a student here, and it doesn't impact your kind of your learning of the English course at all. It's just how the college, the makeup of the college. All other colleges are mixed. Hopefully that answers that.
Great. Question, I think I'll go to Brendan first, but I think, Naomi, I would be interested in your opinion. Does it matter what form of literature a student reads? So, for example, if I generally only read novels, do I have to sort of read other forms of literature as well?
Well, two answers to that, I suppose. In terms of the way that the course works, you'll be made to read all kinds of stuff, right? Or at least strongly encouraged. In terms of what we're looking for admissions-wise, I don't think it matters enormously. What we're looking for is enthusiastic readers. The course requires a lot of reading, and we're looking for people for whom that seems like an opportunity rather than a drag. So no, it doesn't really matter enormously at the admission stage. What we're looking for is that what you've read with, as I say, enthusiasm and insight.
Great. Naomi, would you, obviously
Yeah,
you'd agree, but is there anything
I don't have anything
to
add to that. I don't think. I think Brendan's covered that.
I might just add just a little bit, which is obviously the what you get set at the syllabus at school is obviously quite prescriptive and, dare I say it, quite samey, I think, after a while. So I would encourage you to try something that you've never read before. So if that's a particular theme or period or type of literature, I always think it's good to branch out, because you might come across, I don't know, you might pick up Beowulf. Don't everyone pick up Beowulf, but like you might pick up Beowulf and suddenly realize, oh my God, I love Anglo-Saxon, I love Old English poetry and literature. You just don't, till you've tried it, you might never know what you're really enthusiastic about. Question, I think, probably for Naomi. Is English literature an A-level requirement for every college? Can that be substituted for English language, the English language and literature course?
So I believe there are possibly a few colleges that might accept English language and literature, but I'm not going to comment on which ones those are, because I think that could change year on year, and you should approach individual colleges. I think if you're studying language and literature, I'd highly recommend that you talk to individual colleges. Just send their admissions coordinator an email and ask, do you accept language and literature? Because you want to make sure that you're going to apply to a college that does accept it. And I think there are a few that do. At Corpus, we would strongly favour, and Brenda, correct me if I'm wrong, we strongly favour English literature A-level. It's more a rigorous preparation for the English literature, for the English degree here.
Okay, yeah. Brendan's just nodding.
Broadly speaking, I agree.
Great. And Katie asks, is there any benefit in doing an open application? I'll go to Naomi, I think, probably for that.
Yeah, I don't think there's any benefit to it in terms of statistics. Ultimately, because of the pooling system, everything kind of evens itself out in the end. So if you end up applying to a college that's really oversubscribed 1 year unknowingly, and you're a strong applicant, you might get put in the pool, and you might end up being taken by another college. If you apply to for an open application, you could be sort of assigned to a college and still put in the pool, or assigned to a college and taken on or not. I think ultimately it doesn't actually make a difference. The difference is that if you have strong preferences on, for example, not attending a single-sex college, or attending a college that's in the centre or not in the centre, if you have strong preferences on what you don't want to attend, don't make an open application, because you might end up being assigned to a college that was on your list of would rather not.
Great. Brendan, a question for you. I'm going to sort of smush some questions together, but quite a few questions around about, do we look for students who are sort of mainly focused on like the canon of English literature, or are we interested in students who have just read widely and broadly?
Yeah, I suppose the kind of answer is that we're not focused on either. So obviously, you know, I don't want to get into the weeds of arguing about what the canon is or isn't, and I have a certain set of views about that may not be relevant for this. my speaking personally, I think it's important to emphasize that everybody who takes part in the admissions process has personal opinions on these questions and on the sorts of students we want. It's very much a process of judgment. I just want someone who strikes me as an enthusiastic reader, as someone who, you know, someone who could, you know, read anything well. But I'm not, you know, if what you're reading is, you know, completely sort of quote unquote non-traditional, that's fine by me. I'm really not off-put by that at all. And equally, if you're one of those people who really loves, you know, Jane Austen and Charles Dickens and has read all that stuff, then that's great too. It's the enthusiasm, it's the what you bring to the text that matters, not the text themselves.
Yeah, great answer. It's almost like you do it for, it's almost like you do it for a job, Brendan. So a couple of questions about A levels, and I will direct it to Naomi first, but again, Brendan, your opinion would be interesting as well. Does it matter, assuming that a student does A level English, do we particularly care about the other A levels that one takes? And also, do we prioritize students who do 4 A levels?
Okay, so I'm going to answer the second question first, because I think that's a clear answer. We don't prioritize students who've taken 4 A levels. What we're looking to see you do is the standard for your school. So if your school, as standard, everybody takes 4 A levels and you're taking 3, we might have question marks over why you're not studying the standard for your school. But the vast majority of schools in reality now, you take 3 A levels or equivalent, and that's what the vast majority of our applicants do. With the first question on preferences of other subjects, I think the short answer is no. There's no preference for other subjects. English is the requirement. That's the preparation for the course. Other essay or subjects or subjects that are going to develop analysis skills are useful, but not required. Brendan, do you have a different take on that at all?
Not a different take. I mean, what I would say is from my personal perspective, I am always interested in what A levels people have done, not on the basis that I think some A levels are better than others. I think all A levels are actually quite difficult and you know, intellectually rigorous and worthy of respect, as it were. But I always find it interesting, for example, when we get applicants who have worked on science A levels. And one of the things I might want to ask them is, well, you know, can you make some connections between these disparate things? But there's not it's not like we're expecting, you know, French history, English literature as a sort of, even though that's probably a standard sort of spread. It's not that we're expecting that. I mean, that's not what I did myself for A levels. I mean, I did an A level in physics, and that's been relatively useless to me in my career as an English literature academic. But I don't think it, you know, I don't think it's something that at all marks against you to have studied things which aren't necessarily that proximate to English literature.
As a follow-up, and again, I'll probably go to Naomi first, opinion on the EPQ for an English applicant.
So I think the EPQ is a good way that you can start exploring a different area of English if you're doing your EPQ on something to do with English relatively independently, because it's not taught as such. I think that's kind of one of the useful aspects of it, is it's a good way to direct a sort of a delve into a particular area of English that you're interested in. We, in terms of sort of applications, we don't favour people who've done APQs over people who haven't done APQs, or vice versa. And having done an APQ doesn't lower your offer, because I know at some universities, if you've done an APQ, that can be part of your offer. It might lower the offer. That's not the case here. So I think fairly ambivalent, to be honest. It can be a useful thing. You might write about it interestingly in your personal statement. You might then be asked about it in an interview if you're doing one. But that's probably the use of it. Again, Brendan, do chip in for as an interviewer.
Yeah, I've not got much to add to that. Broadly speaking, agree. I mean, what I will say is that often people send their EPQs to us, as you know. Sometimes we ask for written work as part of the application, and so if you do that, obviously you have to be prepared to talk about it, because we'll read it and be presumably interested in talking to you about it. So, but it's not something that's going to radically damage your application if you're not doing that. But it's interesting to us if you are.
Okay, and then so a couple of questions about the CLAT. So all English applicants have to sit the CLAT. Brendan, is there anything that you would recommend a student can do to prepare for the CLAT?
There are, I believe, available publicly some sort of past paper type exercises. Having a go at those, familiarising yourself with the sort of thing that they're asking you to do. The CLAT's a new programme, kind of, so I don't feel enormously confident predicting like what it's going to be like in the future. We're still at a faculty level trying to figure that out. But I would say like the things that you want to be doing are that kind of preparation practice work, but also kind of just going into it with a positive attitude, right, with an open mind, and trying to make what you can of it. It's not supposed to be a prescriptive test. We're not asking you to say particular kinds of things. We're not going to start giving out big marks if you use our favorite words or whatever. We just want to see what you're capable of and what your kind of style, as it were, is. So I don't know, hard to say, but the CLAT is quite a lot actually like the sort of practical criticism stuff that I talked about earlier today, and some of those recommendations also apply to the CLAT.
Great. Would you, I mean, possibly a question for Naomi, I mean, you're the English expert. Could a student use ELAT past papers if they run out of CLAT past papers?
I would have thought so. It's very similar in structure. Brendan, you've got more experience with the papers. It's
effectively the same kind of test. I think using the ELAT past papers would be a perfect proxy for the CLAT.
Great. So sorry, I'm just going to look at different things. Okay, so more about the English course. And so Brendan, I'll direct it at you. So are there any papers where you have to translate Old English into English? So are you sort of dealing with it in the original language? And then a follow-up question again, which is how much diversity is there in the English in the English papers, in the English options?
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll start with the translation. So if we're talking about Old English, as in pre-Norman Conquest English, that will always be optional. You're not going to be forced to do that. So that's Beowulf and the Seafarer and those sorts of pieces of writing. Highly interesting work, but that is very much a paper where you will need to translate, and it's like learning a new language. Old English in that way is very different from modern English. It's much closer to a sort of German. In terms of the Middle English paper, which is usually a first year paper and is more or less compulsory, the medievalists, I'm not a medievalist, so I don't want to speak out of turn here. The medievalists would scoff at the thought that you need to translate Middle English. They'll say it's just an early form of our language and perfectly understandable. There is a component of the examination where you're asked to give a commentary on an unseen passage of Middle English, and that kind of part of the examination is quite a lot like a can you make sense of this translation passage. What I found, and I think a lot of people found with Middle English, is when you first read it, it does feel like a foreign language, but you can kind of acclimatize to it. You don't need to sit there learning a load of verb constructions in the way that you might need to with, French or, any language really. In terms of the kind of diversity of the papers, well, so we've recently changed the rules for the part one, so the first 2 years, where we used to insist that you wrote a certain amount about British literature, or British and Irish. And in fact, it used to be that you could only write about British and Irish literature in the first 2 years. We've now changed that. So English means all writing in English from wherever, right? From whatever part of the world. And obviously, as you go through history, the parts of the world where English is being used as a language expand, right? So in the period that I teach, which is the sort of modern period, you could be looking at writing that was produced in London or in New York, but you could also be looking at writing produced in Singapore or India or any number of places, South Africa. In terms of the diversity of the work that you can look at, the papers are mostly prescriptive of periods or ideas, but you as a student can to some degree choose what you write on within that prescribed period or idea, right? So I teach, for example, the 1870 to the present day paper to usually second year students. And there are certain things that I will encourage people to read. Like I will say, it's probably a good idea to read T.S. Eliot. It's probably a good idea to read James Joyce. It's probably a good idea to read Virginia Woolf. But I'm also happy for people to say, well, actually, I have a favorite novelist from the last 20 years who I'd like to write about in this paper. I'm happy for them to do that. So to a certain extent, obviously, it would be sad if you did an English degree and you didn't read any John Milton. But we're not expecting you just to kind of read the great and famous names. We're happy for you to read and think about and write on anybody who's of interest to you. So it's a bit of a mix and match.
Great. And again, a sort of related question, I think, as well. And again, I'll direct it to you, Brendan. Quite a few questions about supercurricular, sort of their reading. Would we only count sort of books written in English or material written in English? What about texts that have been translated into English?
This is a complex question, right? And there are a number of sort of edge cases, shall we say. Obviously, as the Faculty of English, we're interested in English, but that's not to say that translated work is uninteresting to us, or that we don't recognize how national or linguistic boundaries are pretty thin gruel when thinking about literature. Like, I mean, there's a sort of tendency to talk about English literature, American literature, Japanese literature, whatever it happens to be. But in truth, all these things we understand are strongly influence each other. So there's no kind of hard and fast answer to this. But I myself am, broadly speaking, perfectly happy with people thinking about literature in translation, so long as we're thinking about the translated part, right? And there is a kind of set of special questions to ask about text in translation, which need to be borne in mind.
Great. I'm conscious there's lots more questions, so I will happily type out some answers to those questions if we want to crack on, Naomi, or I mean, up to you really.
Do you want to take just a couple more, and then I think we'll move on with the last part of the day?
Okay, lovely. So again, I'll probably direct this question at Brendan. You might not be able to give an exact answer, but we've had a few questions around what sort of questions might a student be asked in an interview. So without burning any of your material, any of your questions you might ask.
All my favorite tricks. Well, the types of questions we'll ask will mostly be based either on a sort of unseen passage, I think I talked about earlier today, which you will be shown, given half an hour or so before the interview, or on the material that you send to us. So we'll tend to want to start conversations by saying, in your personal statements or in one of your essays, you say X interesting thing, tell us about that, expand on that. But there's not like a roster of questions that we go through with every candidate. Each conversation is well, we try to make it as much like a conversation as possible, and therefore each is slightly different. I know that there are rumours that do the rounds of sort of ludicrous trick questions. We don't do that. There's no sort of attempt to fool people or I'm not going to do the thing where I sort of pull out an orange and try and make you provide a literary critical account of it or something. Much as that's a tempting thought, I'm not going to do that. The questions might be of a kind of, if not personal, then they might be questions about what you think, right? We assume, and our experience shows us that we get, applicants who know their stuff quite well. But we often want to know, well, what do you think about the reading that you've been doing? What's your opinion, and can you substantiate it? A question that I quite like to ask is to say, well, what do you enjoy reading outside of, the A level or whatever? And that's the point where I want to say, to reiterate, there's no right answer to that. We won't be more impressed if you say, well, I've been reading 900-page 19th century novels. If you say, well, I'm really into, whatever it happens to be, fanfic we get sometimes, right? And there's always interesting conversations to be had about that stuff. So my advice on that would be to say, don't be put off by the questions. We're not trying to trick you. And I don't know, be honest. Say what you think, right?
Yeah. I would just strongly add to that as well. I think students sometimes worry about they have to like the things that we might like or you might like, but you got to be true to yourself. It's a cliche, but you've got to be true to yourself and true to your own interests. Naomi, a question for you. This is around sort of the supercurricular, extracurricular, and might break it down into two things, which is, do we care about extracurriculars? That'd be the first point. Okay, so
no, to be completely blunt. Look, it might make you an interesting person, and that's a more well-rounded person, and that's a positive personal quality. In your personal statement, we'd really strongly recommend that you focus on supercurricular, not extracurricular. Extracurricular isn't ultimately adding to you as an English literature student, and that's what we want to know about in your personal statement. That being said, a lot of other universities do want to hear about your extracurricular, and we fully understand that you're applying to 5 universities, not just to Cambridge. So our general advice is, sure, you can write a bit about extracurricular in your personal statement. We will read your entire personal statement. We will read it if you put it in. We recommend no more than a couple of sentences on it, though, because otherwise you're using up really valuable characters that you could be telling us more about your reading.
Great. And then as a follow-up, what about if an extracurricular might be related in some way to literature? So a couple of people asked about creative writing. A couple of people asked about performing arts.
Yeah, I'm actually going to backtrack slightly on what I said in some senses. So I think if you can link it really relevantly, and maybe literature is one of those subjects which you can sometimes link things like arts, music, dance to like the extracurricular there to literature, and some really interesting conversations can come up around that. During my own personal experience, I came from a dance background and inevitably had to write a bit about dance on my personal statement in order to explain my background a little bit, and it came up quite a lot at interview, and we had really interesting conversations around it at interview. So that's one way of where if extracurricular has, for some, for a particular reason, played a very big part in your life, music is another example that often is the case for people. And I think you can make really interesting links between music and literature as well. Brendan might want to say anything about that and how extracurricular might ever come up, if it does ever come up or is ever considered there.
Yeah, I mean, it might, if it were an interview situation and someone would say, well, I've been playing, music in a group, or I've, been in a play or whatever. It might come up, but we'd probably want to say, well, how does your, playing of the contrabassoon inform your understanding of how poetry works, or something like that. We're not inherently like out there looking for contrabassoon players or people who play really great right back or something like that. It's not the exercise we're getting into. Specifically with things like theatre and creative writing, obviously relevant to the subject matter, and there are opportunities, plenty of opportunities, to take part in those kind of activities in Cambridge. I mean, the place has a certain kind of reputation for producing people in that regard, but it's not. I also want to emphasise that our degree, the English faculty, isn't a theatre studies department. It isn't a creative writing department. We're quite keen actually on not being a creative writing department. It's sort of part of our thing, for reasons that I won't get into. So it's the sort of thing that if you bring up, we'll be interested in, but it's not necessarily going to, be decisive either way.
Exactly. And where I think dance came up for me, it was in relation to English literature, and the questions were very much, how has this informed a reading of a particular play, for example, that I think I mentioned.
Great.
Yeah.
And then possibly we'll have the last one, and I'll probably both of your opinions would be valid, I think. So again, we've had quite a few questions around about, do we prioritize students from certain schools or certain types of schools?
No, we do not. We don't prioritize students from certain types of schools. We're looking for the best students, and it really is the case. We're looking for the best students regardless of which school they've come from. So that's why we contextualize admissions. That's why we look at how you've done at GCSE within the context of your school, so that we can see, how are you within your cohort. That's why we look at you as an A-level student within the context of the type of school that you go to now, but there's no preference for one type of school over another.
Yeah. Brendan, would you want to add anything? I think that's a pretty comprehensive answer.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've nothing to add. I mean, but it's definitely not the case that we're looking for particular kinds of people in that way. We just want the students who we think will thrive most on the course, right? We're trying to fit you to the course in a way, not your school or your background or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah. And then the last question, I always like to end on a fun question, or a fun-ish question. Esme asks, what are your favourite texts?
Brendan, I think, is more relevant to answer that as the actual academic.
It's a hard question. I don't think I can answer with a single thing. I've got lots of favourites, I guess. I'll chuck one out there, right, just randomly. I'm not saying this is my favourite, but a novel that I really love and I wish people read more these days, Humboldt's Gift by Saul Bellow. I think it's a beautiful, incredibly funny novel about it's partly about being a failed English literature academic, right, which I quite enjoy. But it's a wonderful book.
Okay, go on, Naomi. Give us one of yours.
I mean, it depends a little bit. So as a student here, one of my favorite things to study was Evelyn Waugh novels, and that's what I did one of my dissertations on ultimately. Then to teach, I enjoy teaching Shakespeare the most. So it really does vary depending on the context, I think. Yeah.
One of mine, I'd say, For Whom the Bell Tolls. I always like Hemingway. So that's a bit of a cliche. Yeah, middle-aged white man likes Ernest Hemingway, but it is good.